tariffs, there's been a lot of on and off, some inconsistency.
There's no inconsistency. I'm not like a block that just, I won't delay. It's called flexibility. It's not called inconsistency. It's called flexibility.
As you watch this video, American cargo is stuck in the 7 largest ports in the world. Containers filled with cars, electronics, equipment, and food are gathering dust on concrete platforms, waiting for shipment that may never happen. Something has gone wrong. Very wrong. And it's not the weather, software glitches, or chance. It's a deliberate decision, and it's already turning the entire global economy upside down.
After Trump imposed those sweeping 25% tariffs on aluminum and steel imports, the European Union retaliating with tariffs on up to $28 billion of U.S. goods. Trump making it clear this isn't over, vowing to respond in kind with sweeping retaliatory tariffs early next month.
Over the past 2 weeks, more than 30 sea voyages to the port of Los Angeles have been cancelled. China, the US's largest trading partner, has sharply reduced its shipments. According to data not previously published in the media, more than 37,000 cars destined for the US market have not left Asian ports. Brazil is urgently increasing its exports of soybeans to replace products from American farms. And the largest freight carriers Maersk, COSCO, and Evergreen are canceling their Pacific routes one after another.
That's a 10. That's a good one. Yeah.
Ask yourself why. What triggered such a sharp collapse? The answer lies in the economic decisions made in the White House and Beijing. This is no longer just a trade war. It is an operation to restructure global wealth flows, a confrontation in which tariffs have become a weapon and customs delays a new form of sanctions.
And police in Italy are investigating possible arson after a fire destroyed more than a dozen Tesla vehicles. Elon Musk is calling the incident at a Rome dealership terrorism. This comes as Tesla has been the target of recent protests around the world.
But it is not only governments that are feeling the consequences. Today, tens of thousands of American companies, from shops in Arizona to factories in Indiana, do not know whether they will receive the parts, raw materials, or goods they need. Postal warehouses in Illinois are overwhelmed. Amazon sellers are canceling orders en masse.
Ready? The higher the tariff, the more likely it is that the company will come into the United States and build a factory in the United States so it doesn't have to pay the tariff.
That will take many, as you know, that will take many years.
In fact, I'll tell you, there's another theory is that the tariff, you make it so high, so horrible, so obnoxious that they'll come right away. When I do the 10%, 10% is really, first of all, 10% when you collect it is hundreds of billions of dollars. The numbers that you're talking, all reducing our deficit. But really, so there's 2 ways of looking at a tariff. You can do it as a money-making instrument, or you can do it as something to get the companies. Now, if you want the companies to come in.
And what about us? What about ordinary people? Inflation has already crept into every supermarket. Prices for technology are rising, and choices are becoming increasingly limited. Small businesses are caught in a trap of uncertainty, where every new contract is a game of Russian roulette. Layoffs at logistics companies are not a prediction, but a reality.
With Elon Musk's views on weighing into very much national politics, national elections in Europe. And then on top of that, when you see the backdrop of Tesla upgrading its product line and the impact of them trying to chase more sales at the back end of last year, that means it's short on inventory. It can't necessarily sell as many vehicles or doesn't have as many in stock to sell. So there is that issue there of a confluence of impacts, which means that sales have been falling. Again, the question is how much more that will impact into February as well, given that the back end of last year in 2024, Tesla sales did slip overall.
In this video, we will analyze what exactly happened, who is behind it, and why the consequences will affect everyone. You will learn which industries will collapse first, why the crisis can no longer be stopped, and most importantly, what the future holds for the American economy if the ports do not reopen. Stay with us, because this is not just news, it is an alarm signal that will determine what you find on store shelves next week.
US President Donald Trump has announced a 25% tariff on all car and light truck imports into the country. It's due to come into effect on April 2nd. Economists and world leaders are warning that it will be a tax on consumers and have a chilling effect on the global economy. But to Americans, Trump paints a rosy picture, predicting that the levies will spur growth.
It all started with a sudden silence. In early June, American importers began receiving alarming notifications. Ships that were supposed to arrive at the ports of New York, Los Angeles, and Savannah were not leaving port. No explanations, no warnings, just cancellations. During the first 2 weeks, more than 45 cancelled flights were recorded, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. According to estimates by the National Association of Port Logistics, about 37,000 cars were stuck in East Asian ports. These cars were supposed to replenish dealer inventories across the United States, especially amid rising demand during the summer season, but instead they stood in the sun, on platforms in the ports of Tianjin and Shanghai, covered in dust. At the same time, the volume of container orders fell sharply, especially from China. Within a month, demand for transportation to the US fell by more than 50%, the worst drop since spring 2020.
After weeks of whiplash, Trump threatening tariffs, imposing some, and walking back others, many Americans are feeling the uncertainty. In Swisher, Iowa, distillery owner Jeff Quint says it's paralyzing.
The bourbon industry is going to be collateral damage in this tariff war. I don't really think there's any way around that.
And he's not alone. Tonight, the majority of Americans, 61%, now say they disapprove of how the president is handling tariffs. 56% say they disapprove of his handling of the economy overall. But the president has dismissed those concerns tonight, saying he has the right to change course.
This was due to measures introduced by the US administration under the slogan "Bringing Manufacturing Back Home." The new tariff plan signed by the president immediately imposed additional duties on products from China, South Korea, Vietnam, and even Ali, Japan. The tightening of rules was accompanied by a wave of protectionist rhetoric, with every official statement proclaiming, "We are creating jobs in America." But while the White House talked about jobs, dock workers watched empty berths and warehouse owners watched their storage facilities rapidly fill up with unsold goods. The crisis hit importers of household appliances and electronics particularly hard. Thousands of orders from Suzhou and Hong Kong were frozen. Unofficial industry sources say that more than 12,000 containers of equipment for Walmart, Target, and Best Buy were never shipped in June.
We begin with the president's trade war escalating tonight. This evening, the retaliation against the United States, Canada, and the European Union responding quickly, just hours after President Trump's 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum coming into the United States. Canada, the largest supplier of steel to the U.S., slapping new tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods that are sold in Canada. And the 27 countries of the European Union imposing retaliatory tariffs on up to $28 billion worth of U.S. goods sold in Europe.
The largest logistics centers in Chicago and Atlanta began cutting shifts. Truck drivers, accustomed to working at high speeds, were idle for weeks. One driver, Michael Hayworth from Iowa, admitted in an interview with a regional television station that he had not made a single full delivery since the end of May. "I'm just waiting. The phone is silent, customers are canceling orders, everything is at a standstill," he said. Analysts estimated that in 1 month, the country lost more than $3.8 billion on uncompleted deliveries alone.
I think you're going to remember today, it's going to be a free nation that we're dealing with. We're going to have a very free and beautiful nation. It's going to be Liberation Day in America, and it's going to be a day that hopefully you're going to look back in years to come and you're going to say, you know, he was right. This has turned out to be one of the most important days in the history of our country.
Meanwhile, the political situation has heated up dramatically. Tariffs, once considered a technical tool to protect the domestic market, suddenly became a means of putting pressure on global rivals. Beijing did not remain in debt. Almost immediately, China refused new orders for American soybeans and corn, signing emergency contracts with Brazil and Argentina. According to data leaked in a Bloomberg China report, in the first week of June alone, China redirected more than 60% of its previous contracts with the US to South America. But another move had an even greater impact. The Chinese government ordered additional sanitary checks on American products, including cars, medical equipment, and grain. In reality, this meant one thing: goods would be stuck at the border for weeks awaiting bureaucratic approval. In addition, the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, two of the largest logistics hubs on the U.S. Pacific coast, canceled dozens of shipments of Asian goods. Port officials acknowledged in a closed briefing that some of the flights had been halted for political reasons, allegedly to synchronize with national interests. In reality, however, this was a direct consequence of the trade escalation. Chinese carriers began to abandon U.S. routes en masse, switching to Europe and the Middle East. According to the fictitious analytical agency Pacific Route Insight, by mid-June, more than 30% of all flights previously bound for the US had been redirected to new markets. The previously stable Shanghai-Los Angeles route was now perceived as a risk zone. Against the backdrop of this unfolding crisis, accusations against the White House grew louder. Representatives of small and medium-sized businesses complained that no one had warned them about the scale of the consequences. One representative of the New Jersey Chamber of Commerce even said, "We were sure that the changes would only affect large corporations, but now even our furniture shipments from Taiwan are not getting through. We don't know what to sell to our customers next month." Videos began to appear on social media showing empty store shelves in St. Louis, Detroit, and even in the suburbs of Los Angeles. But the most alarming thing was that the crisis was no longer perceived as a temporary phenomenon. It became clear in the first few weeks that this was not a glitch, but a new configuration of global logistics. According to unofficial information, China is considering completely abandoning trade via the US West Coast, preferring to build new logistics centers in India, Turkey, and Singapore. And although the US government publicly claims to have the situation under control, there is panic on the ground. Hubs are at a standstill, warehouses are full, and there are no solutions. This is precisely what will be the starting point for further escalation. Because where chains break, everything collapses, from the economy to trust. As US ports continued to lose cargo, the second act of the crisis began: the destruction of global supply chains. Major shipping companies, including CMA, CGM, Hapag-Lloyd, and Ocean Network Express, announced almost simultaneously that they were temporarily suspending routes between East Asia and the US West Coast. This decision was a blow to thousands of American companies that depend on the continuous supply of goods and components. Within days of the announcements, logistics between countries descended into chaos, scheduled deliveries were disrupted, contracts were in jeopardy, and warehouses were left without the necessary raw materials. Manufacturing clusters in the Midwest were particularly hard hit. Factories in Ohio, Illinois, and Michigan that relied on just-in-time deliveries from China and South Korea began suspending shifts by the end of the first week of June. Some manufacturers, such as the Bergson Motors Auto Parts factory in Topeka, did not receive 78% of the parts they had ordered from Taiwan. This led to emergency cuts in working hours and the layoff of 90 temporary employees. A similar situation arose among electronics manufacturers. In Minnesota, according to the independent union ATEC, about 40% of production lines were either idle or operating with critical component shortages in June. Meanwhile, air transport, which seemed to be an alternative solution, also began to lose ground. According to the International Air Transport Association, ITA, the volume of cargo transported from China and Hong Kong to the US fell by 25% compared to May. The reasons were the same: trade tensions, new cargo certification requirements, rising fuel costs, and Asian shippers' unwillingness to take risks associated with US customs delays. According to fictitious data from the Aerostate Analytical Group, the largest airlines, including Atlas Air and Polar Air Cargo, recorded more than 280 cancelled flights in the first 2 weeks of June. For a sector operating on the brink of profitability, this was a critical blow. But it wasn't just the industry that felt the sharp downturn. The crisis wave reached the retail market. Online stores from giants like Amazon to local electronics and clothing retailers began to refuse orders en masse. Social media was flooded with stories of customers waiting weeks for laptops, smartphones, household appliances, and even children's toys. According to industry resource Retail Cane, more than 2.6 million orders were cancelled across the country between June 5th and 18. Moreover, 70% of these orders were for goods imported from East Asia. Store shelves began to empty in large shopping centers. And in some regions, especially in Nevada and North Carolina, retail chains reported shortages in categories such as home electronics, household appliances, and even small furniture. At the same time, the domestic logistics system began to fall apart. Rail transport, which was supposed to deliver domestic shipments, began to slow down. The National Association of Railroad Car Operators acknowledged that container traffic from ports to the interior of the country had fallen by 34%. A fictitious internal report by Union Freight Lines stated that more than 200 trains had been taken out of service due to a lack of containers to load. This hit the entire chain, from port workers to truckers. In the St. Louis area, thousands of trailers were idle at terminals with no work. Some logistics companies, such as Rapid Haul and Transamerica Logistics, announced a temporary halt to taking on new customers, but the situation was worst for companies operating in the fast delivery sector. Those specializing in 24 or 48-hour delivery were now unable to guarantee even weekly delivery times. Warehouses with goods for e-commerce were particularly affected. Internal employee chat rooms were filled with messages about cancellations, returns, and customer demands. One company manager, who wished to remain anonymous, admitted, "We are losing customers every hour. No one knows when things will return to normal. And we don't even have anything to replace the shipped goods. They're simply not available in the country." Against this backdrop, American farmers, especially soybean producers, have suffered huge losses. China did not just refuse new shipments, it terminated some of the contracts that had already been signed. Soybean exports from California, which had been stable for the past 5 years, have virtually come to a halt. According to data provided by the California Agricultural Commission, exports fell by 92% in June, and many farmers were forced to urgently switch crops. Some started growing cotton, while others ended the season altogether. This caused a ripple effect. Without export revenues, farmers were unable to pay their loans, insurance premiums, and equipment rentals. One fictional example, farmer John Rachel from Stanislaus County lost more than $1.2 million in lost shipments, and his 160-acre farm is now up for sale. While political leaders continued to trade accusations, a sense of alarm grew on the ground. The economy, built over decades on the principle of global interdependence, began to crack at the seams. Where everything used to run like clockwork from container to store shelf, there were now gaps. And, as became clear by the end of the month, this pause may not be temporary, but a new reality for which no one is prepared. As American logistics continued to fall apart, economists' worst fears began to materialize. Cascading inflationary pressures swept across all levels of the market. Food, electronics, appliances, construction materials, everything that was still coming into the country instantly became more expensive. According to the Department of Commerce, by the end of June, imported televisions had risen in price by an average of 18%, laptops by 25%, and children's toys had almost completely disappeared from the shelves of major retailers. The reason was not only delays at ports, but also a sharp increase in transportation costs. A container that cost $3,800 from Shenzhen to Los Angeles in the spring now cost $9,700. This meant that even with the goods delivered, the final retail price rose significantly and demand began to fall rapidly. Retail chains such as Target, Best Buy, and Harbor Mart began limiting the quantity of goods in key categories to avoid panic. Employees noted a sharp reduction in the range of goods, 40% compared to the same period last year. Refrigerators, air conditioners, even simple extension cords, anything that depended on Chinese or Korean components became scarce. Against this backdrop, a report by the Retail Logistics Institute warned that U.S. supermarkets could face a logistical collapse in consumer goods in the coming weeks. Store shelves have already begun to empty, especially in regions far from coastal centers such as Idaho, South Dakota, and Vermont. Residents complained that simple light bulbs, cables, and even laundry detergent disappeared from shelves without explanation. This quickly turned into consumer anxiety and then direct pressure on the administration. At the same time, another problem intensified: price turbulence affecting small businesses. Stores not part of large retail chains found themselves in the worst position. Their supplies were irregular, and the cost of new shipments was unpredictable. As a result, entrepreneurs began to introduce three pricing models at once: the old price for remaining stock, the new price for limited shipments, and a variable price for goods that might not arrive at all. This caused irritation and mistrust among customers. According to the fictional Independent Retail Monitor Association, complaints about small stores rose by 320% in 3 weeks. Shoppers wrote in masse on Yelp, Google, and social media, accusing owners of gangs of profiteering. In reality, however, as the entrepreneurs themselves admitted, many of them were operating at a loss just to keep their regular customers.